The new intern at my company had been asking me for rides home every day. Since we lived in the same direction, I allowed it at first. Until one weekend. It was well past midnight, and I was deeply asleep when my phone suddenly rang. Still half asleep, I answered. Her voice came through firm and demanding, as if she was used to people following her orders. "I'm at Core Lounge doing karaoke. Come pick me up and take me home." I sat up, already irritated. "It's 2 in the morning. Don't you think it's unreasonable to call me and expect a ride at this hour? I'm not your driver." She responded with a cold, dismissive laugh. "My cousin is the HR director. Driving me around is a privilege for you. Do what you're told or I'll make sure you lose your job." I paused, not because I felt threatened, but because the situation was almost absurd. She still had no idea who I was, and I didn't bother correcting her. Vanessa Cole made a small sound of impatience. "What's wrong? Nervous now? Then hurry up and bring me a hot milk on the way. I want it as soon as I get in the car." I listened as she continued adding demands, as if it were completely normal. Honestly, I couldn't help but laugh. Vanessa had only been working at the company for about a month. The first time I saw her, I had just returned from inspecting the factory floor, still dressed in my work clothes. I ran into her in the elevator right after her interview. She wrinkled her nose, looked me over, and subtly stepped away. People at the company often kept their distance when they saw me, so I didn't think much of it. The next day, after work, I was about to drive home when Vanessa walked straight up to my car, opened the passenger door, and sat down. Her tone was completely casual. "You're one of the factory techs, right? I saw you heading toward Lakeview Residences yesterday. That's where I live. Drop me off on your way." I was briefly stunned. I oversee more than a dozen companies with tens of thousands of employees, and yet this was the first time someone had spoken to me like that. I started to respond, but she had already fastened her seatbelt and
That's how simple it is. I went quiet for a moment because I remembered that situation clearly. A longtime employee, consistent and dependable, had suddenly been moved to the warehouse. At the time, it didn't add up. I had even asked about it. The explanation I received was that he had requested the transfer himself, saying he wanted a change of pace. I assumed he was burned out, so I approved it. Now, it was obvious what had actually happened. I took a slow breath. Your cousin certainly knows how to manage things. Vanessa completely missed the meaning behind my words. She sounded even more pleased. "Now you're starting to understand," she said. "My cousin told me that in a few months, he's bringing our entire family into the company. Every one of them." Her tone sharpened slightly. "Men, women, young, old, placed across every department. Once that happens, the whole company will answer to us." I gave a faint smile. "Which HR director is that again?" I asked. Then added, "Isn't your cousin concerned the owner might find out?" Vanessa laughed confidently. "My cousin already thought about that. The owner of this company is the richest man in the city. He runs more than a dozen major corporations." She scoffed lightly. "Do you really think he has time to worry about a small branch like this?" Then she said it directly. "As long as the boss isn't around, my cousin is the one in charge. Period." I smiled again. She wasn't wrong about one thing. I did oversee more than a dozen companies, and those operations had been stable for years. This branch, however, had been underperforming for a long time. That was exactly why I had been coming here almost daily, checking the factory, reviewing the numbers, trying to identify the issue. Now, I finally understood the problem wasn't external. It was internal. "Are you coming or not?" Vanessa snapped again. "Let me be clear. Once my family joins this company, every single one of them will outrank you." She didn't pause. "If you don't start showing respect now, you'll regret it later." I listened to her demands, and I couldn't help but laugh. "That's interesting," I said calmly. "I've never been the type to flatter anyone." Then I added, "If your family has such strong connections, you can arrange your own ride home." And I hung up. Vanessa didn't speak either. Desmond gave them both a brief look, then turned back to me. "Would you like to begin on time?" "On time," I replied. Then I walked past them and headed straight toward the entrance. Behind me, I could hear Vanessa whispering to Daniel. Her tone had changed. It was no longer confident. It sounded urgent, almost unsettled. I didn't turn around. There was a meeting to lead, and it was time for the company to be reminded who was actually in charge. The main conference room occupied the entire northeast corner of the 4th floor. It had glass walls, fully visible from the outside. That design was intentional. When I had it built 3 years ago, the architect asked if I wanted privacy. I declined. I wanted transparency, so people could see that decisions weren't made behind closed doors. Today, that transparency carried a different weight. I walked in at 8:57. The room was already full. Department managers, supervisors, office staff, factory technicians. Some were standing because there weren't enough seats. Desmond had arranged additional screens outside so employees in the hallway could follow the meeting. I took my seat at the head of the table. There was no stage, no microphone, no presentation. Just me and silence. As soon as people realized the meeting had started, the room became completely still. Daniel entered 2 minutes later, with Vanessa right behind him. They looked around for seats, but there were none, so they remained at the back, standing against the wall. Vanessa kept her gaze lowered. Daniel tried to appear composed, but it didn't look natural. "Good morning," I said. My voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. "I'll keep this brief. I value everyone's time." I paused. Over the past few weeks, I've been visiting this branch quietly, observing operations, walking the factory floor, and speaking with... Nothing remarkable. Nothing concerning. Just average. The kind of person who doesn't draw attention. I requested his full file, and that night, back at the hotel, I reviewed it carefully. On the surface, nothing stood out. But within his past transfers, there was a detail. At one of the branches he had worked at years earlier, the HR director had been dismissed for irregular hiring practices. Marcus Hale had been questioned during that internal review. The report stated there was no evidence of his involvement. What the report didn't mention, because no one had looked deeper, was that the HR director who was dismissed back then was Daniel Brooks's uncle. I closed the file. There it was. This wasn't new. It had been developing over time, moving quietly from one branch to another, establishing itself, waiting. They had chosen carefully,